Welcome to Dark Confession, where hidden secrets refuse to stay buried, where forgotten crimes resurface from the shadows of history, and where some of the darkest truths are waiting to be uncovered. Tonight's story takes us back more than a century to Thailand, where a shocking discovery floating in a quiet river would expose a case filled with deception, obsession, betrayal, and murder. What began as an ordinary day for a group of fishermen would soon lead investigators down a path that revealed one of the country's earliest known serial killers. Have you ever wondered what the world's earliest serial killers were really like? Long before modern criminal profiling existed, violent predators were already hiding in plain sight. More than a century ago, in Thailand, one man would become infamous for a series of disturbing murders tied to manipulation, superstition, and betrayal. The case began in January 1918 near the Chao Phraya River in Nonthaburi province. A group of fishermen had gathered near the riverbank beside a quiet temple, hoping to catch fish before nightfall. As they waited, something unusual drifted slowly across the water toward them. It was a large metal trunk. At first, the men assumed it belonged to a wealthy family. Containers like that were expensive at the time, and some believed valuables might be hidden inside. Curious, they pulled it ashore and forced the lid open. What they found instantly shattered the calm afternoon. Inside the trunk were the remains of a young woman whose body had been brutally dismembered. Her limbs were tied with rope, and heavy bricks had been packed around the remains, apparently meant to keep the container beneath the water. Witnesses later said several fishermen stumbled backward in panic, while others rushed to notify local authorities. When police arrived, the scene left them deeply unsettled. Murders of this nature were extremely rare in Thailand at the time, and investigators struggled to understand who could have committed such a crime. The victim carried no identification, and no one nearby recognized her. For several days, the investigation went nowhere. Then a local rickshaw driver approached police with a statement that changed the entire case. He claimed a man named Bunpang had hired him to transport the heavy trunk shortly before it was dumped into the river. At first, the name meant little to investigators, but as they began looking into Bunpang's past, they discovered rumors involving forbidden rituals, wealthy followers, and strange disappearances surrounding a respected former monk. And that was only the beginning. Bunpang was born around 1890 in northeastern Thailand to a Chinese father and a Lao mother. His early life was unstable, and after both parents reportedly passed away when he was still very young, he was raised by an elderly couple in Bangkok. They provided him shelter and basic care, and to outsiders he appeared to grow up normally. Yet people who knew him in his teenage years later recalled something unusual about his personality. He was charming and confident, but also had a tendency to lie effortlessly and manipulate situations to his advantage. He avoided hard labor and showed little interest in responsibility. Instead, his attention drifted toward mysticism, fortune-telling, and supernatural practices that were popular in local belief systems at the time. He became fascinated with charms, love rituals, and the idea of influencing human emotions through hidden forces. Over time, this interest deepened into obsession. He eventually met an older man who was known in the area for teaching spiritual practices outside mainstream religion. From him, Bunpang learned rituals and beliefs tied to forbidden forms of spiritual manipulation. What began as curiosity slowly turned into daily practice. Neighbors later recalled that his behavior began to change. He spent long hours alone, muttering to himself, and became increasingly secretive. Some even said he appeared detached, as if he were living in a world of his own making. Eventually, his guardians became alarmed. Fearing that his obsession was leading him down a dangerous path, they forced him to leave their home. Now alone in Bangkok, Bunpang began offering spiritual services for money. He sold charms, fortune readings, and so-called love potions to people desperate for help in their personal lives. His reputation grew quickly, partly because of his charisma, and partly because of how convincingly he presented himself. Not long after, he entered monkhood at a local temple. At first, his presence seemed harmless. He spoke calmly, carried himself with discipline, and attracted followers from different social classes. Some visitors believed he had genuine spiritual insight, while others were drawn to his reputation for solving emotional problems. Yet behind the temple walls, his influence was not entirely spiritual. Unknown to many of his followers, Bunpang's relationships with certain visitors became increasingly personal and inappropriate, and rumors began to circulate quietly within the community. What started as admiration was slowly turning into suspicion. As Bunpang's reputation grew inside the temple, more people began seeking him out for personal problems, especially wealthy women struggling with love, marriage, and emotional distance. He presented himself as someone who could restore balance through spiritual guidance and hidden rituals. Yet beneath that calm image, his influence over people was becoming something far more dangerous. Over time, Bunpang began using trust as a tool. Visitors who came to him for help often left believing they had received special attention, even blessings that others did not have access to. This created dependency and, in some cases, emotional attachment. Behind the respected image, however, investigators later believed he had already crossed a far darker line. The first known victim was a jewelry trader who arrived to sell his goods. Instead of conducting a simple transaction, Bunpang allegedly saw an opportunity. With the help of close associates, the trader was killed inside the temple environment. What followed was calculated and methodical. The body was dismembered and concealed inside a heavy storage chest before being transported away under cover of secrecy and dumped into a canal. At the time, there were no immediate suspects, and the case quickly went cold. What made the situation even more alarming was the fact that no one considered a monk capable of such violence. That single assumption allowed Bunpang to continue living in plain sight. In the years that followed, several women connected to him disappeared under unclear circumstances. Many had visited him seeking spiritual help in relationships or emotional distress. One of them, a young woman named Prick, would later become central to the investigation. Prick came from a wealthy family and was trapped in an unhappy marriage. Emotionally isolated, she searched for someone who could help restore affection and attention in her life. When she heard of Bunpang's supposed abilities, she decided to meet him. At first, he offered reassurance, but what began as spiritual counsel gradually turned into something more personal, and eventually, a hidden relationship developed between them. When Prick later became pregnant, the situation shifted completely. What had once been secrecy turned into risk, and what had once been control turned into complication. And Bunpang was not the type of man to accept consequences. By the time Prick's pregnancy became known, Bunpang's life was already built on secrecy, deception, and control. According to later testimony, he had begun planning a future with another woman, and Prick no longer fit into that life. What changed next was not emotional, it was calculated. Prick received a letter from Bunpang asking her to meet him privately. There was no sign of danger in the message, only familiarity and reassurance. Trusting him, she agreed to come. Witnesses later suggested the meeting began normally. The two spoke quietly, away from public view, as if resolving personal matters. But the situation soon shifted into something irreversible. Investigators believed Bunpang chose the moment carefully. When her guard was lowered, he attacked and strangled her, ending her life in silence. Afterward, the crime did not end. It escalated into concealment. With the help of two close followers, the body was dismembered and placed inside a heavy metal trunk. Bricks were added to increase its weight, and the group transported it across the city under cover of night before dumping it into the Chao Phraya River. They assumed the water would erase all traces. Instead, it revealed everything. Days later, fishermen recovered the floating trunk, and what they found inside quickly turned a missing person concern into a homicide investigation. Police released details of the unidentified victim to the public, hoping for recognition. That strategy worked when Prick's mother arrived at the station and confirmed her daughter's identity after seeing the description. Her testimony added a crucial detail. Prick had recently received a letter from Bunpang. That connection pushed investigators directly toward the monk. At first, Bunpang denied involvement completely. There was no physical evidence strong enough to convict him immediately, and he maintained a calm, controlled demeanor during questioning. But the case shifted when one of his own followers broke silence. A young disciple admitted helping transport the trunk and revealed something even more disturbing. This was not the first time Bunpang had been linked to a killing. That confession finally gave police what they needed. During a shocking moment, authorities arrested Bunpang during a wedding ceremony, ending his life of influence and secrecy in front of stunned guests. And what he admitted next would widen the case even further. After his arrest, Bunpang was taken in for questioning as investigators reopened several missing person cases connected to his name. The pattern was difficult to ignore. People who had visited him for spiritual help often vanished, and in some cases, strange reports followed. Despite limited physical evidence, pressure from witness statements and his own followers gradually broke down the case. Bunpang eventually confessed to the murder of the jewelry trader and Prick. He maintained control in his statements, but investigators believed those were only part of a much larger pattern. Several other disappearances were reviewed, most involving women who had visited him for emotional or financial guidance. However, Bunpang refused to admit responsibility beyond the two confirmed killings. Even without full confessions, the evidence was enough. He was sentenced to death. On August 19, 1919, Bunpang was publicly executed in front of a large crowd. Witnesses described a tense silence as he was tied to a wooden structure and prepared for beheading, a method still used in Thailand at the time. As the execution began, local accounts turned into folklore. Some witnesses claimed the first strike of the blade seemed unusually ineffective, as if it had lost its edge at the moment it touched him. Others believed he was quietly murmuring under his breath, possibly reciting spiritual phrases or rituals. According to legend, the executioner paused and demanded he remove a small object from his mouth before continuing. Bunpang reportedly spat out a dark amulet before the final strike was carried out successfully. Moments later, the execution was completed, but the story did not end there. In the years that followed, rumors spread that Bunpang's spirit remained tied to the area where he was buried. Locals eventually built a small shrine nearby, not as worship but as a way of calming what they believed was a restless presence. Over time, folklore transformed him from a feared criminal into a local ghost story, sometimes called Uncle Bunpang. Even today, stories still circulate about strange feelings, cold spots, and unease near the site linked to him. More than a century later, Bunpang's crimes remain surrounded by unanswered questions. How many victims were never discovered? How many stories were never told? And somewhere within that mystery may still be people who never received justice.